I'm gonna miss a Friday this month. It'll be like the 18th.
Okay.
Buddies are going to Jackson Hole. Do I just need to let you know and get whatever work I missed or?
Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
have the slides and recording up for that day and just, yeah, you can send me an email or just catch up on all of that stuff.
That Monday. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, thanks for checking in.
Yeah.
I did some warm-ups. Oh, wait, are you just
Awesome.
leaving?
Oh, I'll be back.
Oh, yeah, I did some warm-ups before coming, so I was able to like talk with my group mates without getting sudden.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all
It's
good.
better than the last group, activity, so.
Okay.
Thank you for the, because I think you advised us to do that in community, I think it was public speaking or was
Yeah.
this stuff? Yeah.
Yeah,
It
but-
works. I
Yeah,
like
it
that.
does. It's like, you feel silly doing it, but it really helps
It
later.
does.
You,
Help me listen up.
yeah,
Thank you. I'll
Yeah.
let you go.
yeah. Have a good one.
Hi. Oh, you have classes, then? Yes. Oh, yeah, you have friends with somebody. I mean, she's my friend, but she also has this class. After.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, yes, I know. I was like, oh. What classes were you guys just?
The same time together in small groups, that's why I
Oh.
remember like, oh, yeah, your classes. Cause she's very confident in, public speaking. And then I didn't know that she took more communications as well, just different kinds of mine.
Oh.
You got a fun.
Bye.
Okay, good afternoon. Let's get rolling. Happy Friday. I hope that the second week of the term is going well for you as we start to settle into more of a routine. So today we're going to be going over a little bit of new stuff, but most of the class is going to be spent working on a survival activity where I'll be putting you in small groups and asking you to work through a scenario. Then we'll be talking about that together. So to get us started, last class, as a quick recap, we talked about group norms, right? The idea that when we're a part of a group, there are either written or implied things that we as group members are expected to do. We talked a little bit about how group norms might be helpful as you're gearing up for your reflection assignment in the class, such as considering what norms are at play in your group. And then we also talked about Bellman's self-perception inventory. This lays out 9 different roles that you as a member of a group might find yourself taking on. These 9 different roles are shaped by if you're more of a thinker, right? Somebody like a plant who's developing the ideas and thinking outside of the box, whether you're more action-oriented, such as a team worker who is accomplishing tasks, or whether you're more focused on management, somebody such as a monitor evaluator who's in more of a role of leadership in the group. So you might be thinking about these different roles. They're in this week's reading and applying them to the small group that you've chosen for your assignment. Just as a reminder, there is a quiz for this week, but because of MLK, I've extended the deadline on that. So your week 2 quiz is due next Wednesday. Welcome to finish that ahead of time, but not due until then. For today, we're going to be looking at some other elements of small group norms, particularly the role of things like trust and status. This stuff is important because oftentimes, as you all have mentioned, we find ourselves in groups where we don't work together the way that we want to. We don't have trust that we want to in groups. So this helps us to break down and understand where things might be going wrong and troubleshoot to make our groups work better. We're talking a little bit about media and media's role in small groups, and then doing the survival activity in just a bit. So we've talked about the role of group norms, the idea that when you're in a group, you have to abide by a certain set of behaviors. And I think it's important to think about why this matters. If we take on a rhetorical perspective, when we're in a group, our goal is to persuade. Or if we take on a systems perspective, our goal in a group is to work effectively for the achievement of a task, right? And oftentimes we want to be able to be trusted, respected, and included in a group. We want to know that other people are glad that we're here. So I think it's important to think about how, as groups create and shape norms, right? Failing to follow these norms creates problems. Say you're in a group, and for your group's first meeting, there's an expectation that if somebody has a question or something they'd like to say, that they raise their hand. But you come into a group and you start interrupting, speaking very openly in the group, and so on, right? That would be a violation of group norms that has some ramifications. One of them is a loss of influence. You can think about this like crying wolf, right? The boy who cried wolf, he cried again and again, and each time that happened, he was trusted less and less. So you lose influence if you're seen as somebody that's not respecting the rules or expectations of the group. And if your goal is to persuade or offer input, right, that input is going to be taken less seriously. Another problem is experiencing ostracization, right, of feeling excluded or intentionally left out of the proceedings of the group. Exclusion, not being invited to meetings, not having the opportunity to contribute to the group is another problem, right? So we might find ourselves singled out, targeted, or left out of the group if we're not able to follow the particular expectations the group has laid out for us, right? Especially if we're a newer member of the group, we might tend to learn the norms and follow in a bit of a quieter way. Oftentimes, there's a greater willingness to break the rules and norms of the group if somebody is a more senior member or has a position of leadership in part. When it comes to group norms, right, there's a lot of different things that we can choose to do here. One of the things that we can do to start out is making sure that everybody understands the purpose, right? Oftentimes we find ourselves in groups where we don't get things done or we don't achieve what we set out to do. And sometimes this happens because there's a misunderstanding about what the goals and practices of the group even are. For example, maybe you're forming a study group and you need to make sure that everybody understands that our goal is to fully prepare and study for chapter 6 for the exam next week, right? Starting out a meeting and making sure that you have an agenda or goals in mind for that meeting is important to make sure everybody's on the same page. Seeing if other people understand the group in the same way, right? So for instance, maybe you're in a dorm and you're trying to create an understanding among group members that you're collaborating and trading off on chores and tasks that you all take on, right? The expectation is not that one person does all of that work, but to develop an understanding of how group work is shared. Explaining why a norm ought to be changed is important, right? So there's a logical fallacy known as the appeal to tradition. And the appeal to tradition says, this is how we've done something in the past. And so as a result, this is how we're doing it now. And there's nothing wrong with continuing to do a practice over time, but it's also important for us to change norms as circumstances change. Obviously, we had to make a lot of changes in February, March of 2020. But if we never changed norms, we would still, you'd be registering for classes with like a note card, right? Rather than doing so online. So it's important for us to think about when it's appropriate to change a norm, and we're more willing to have norms change if we hear them from a more senior member. If you've been here for a while and you're suggesting a change or reform, you're more likely to be trusted than an outsider who maybe doesn't understand the dynamics of the group. Offering a plan and a replacement is important, right? If you're changing norms and behaviors of a group, explaining why that change is being done and what's going to be the alternative is important. Maybe you say, hey, our study group isn't working. We're not really getting much done. Instead, let's develop a set of practice questions for ourselves and work through those questions together to help each other study. And then lastly, considering the structure of the group. Maybe there's a member of your study group who is always goofing off and doesn't seem very serious. Maybe they need to be removed from the group. Or maybe your group is very large and needs to be divided up so that people can better collaborate with each other. So all things to consider when we're looking at group norms and group behavior. Another important thing for us to consider in group settings is the role of status. Not all groups are going to have equal positions among members, right? Status of groups is not necessarily set in stone. Sometimes it changes depending on the expertise and the background of group members, the experience that they bring to the table. But it's important for us to think about how somebody who's important or significant to the group wields an amount of authority and can dictate the ways the group communicates in a different way than others, right? For instance, somebody of higher status might direct and talk about very different topics than other people, right? Perhaps your coach is worried about things such as preparing for competition. It might be shared among group members. There's also considering factors such as budget, such as travel logistics, and so on. It might be bringing up those topics in a group setting in a unique way. People of higher status generally are taken more seriously in a group setting, right? If somebody has a position of leadership, perhaps they're the treasurer of a group, or right, they have a title, they're more likely to have other group members turn to them as a source of credibility unless they prove otherwise. And another factor to consider is that people of higher status in a group setting tend to be those that speak a little bit more. Oftentimes, this is because it's a leader who's directing the group and working through the agenda of the group, right? But there are also situations where this backfires, particularly if somebody is mediating or trying to facilitate a group setting. Generally, they should be speaking less than other group members and allowing other people to hash out their differences or discussion a little bit more. So status definitely dictates how people are speaking and behaving in a group, right? And knowing the role of status in a group, role of power distance, as we talked about last class, is important too. Speaking out of turn, right, is something we should avoid doing, particularly when it comes to a potential leader or expert in the group, right? Again, this can change. Perhaps somebody takes on a leadership role or is responsible for taking minutes in each of the group meetings, and there's some rotation there. So really big element of what makes small group communication challenging is trust, right? If you find yourself working in a group on a school project, right, you have a lot of concern. It's like a trust ball. And can I count on this person so that I can get the grade on the assignment that I want, right? Or perhaps you're working together on a team, right? And you have to know that if you pass the ball to this person, that they're going to do a good job, right? So trust is important. It's about integrity, right? And doing the right thing when nobody's watching. It's about the strength of the group, how cohesive and able to work together effectively the group is. It's about ability. Can members of the group achieve the tasks that they need to? We can think back to the self-perception inventories of the roles, like a monitor, evaluator, plan, and so forth. And we also have to think about dependability, right? If somebody's a team worker or has effectively contributed to a group in the past, they're dependable. They can count on them again in the future. So that's an important thing for groups to be able to establish with each other, is the ability to depend on each other. So oftentimes we take a gamble on trust, right? We trust members of a group to do the right thing, but we're not sure that they will, right? We're not sure that they're going to contribute on completing an assignment or working together and covering the shifts that they need to for a day. But the best way that we build trust is through time. If somebody is dependable, is consistently showing up and contributing, offering their input to a group, then that helps that group succeed, right? That brings us back to uncertainty reduction theory, the idea that as we communicate and spend more time with other people, right, we reduce the cognitive behavioral uncertainty we experience with them. We feel more comfortable with them because we have a better sense of how they're going to behave and act in any situation. When it comes to how we build trust, right, and I think this is directly useful if you're ever working in a small group for a class on any sort of assignment, or you find yourself in a professional setting needing to develop trust between other people. Directness is really useful. Oftentimes it's better to express your concerns with a group rather than feel increasingly alienated or frustrated with the group. Perhaps you're frustrated because you feel like you have ideas, you're constantly being cut off or not able to speak those ideas, right? Being direct and saying, hey, I'd like more of a chance to share my thoughts is important for the group to work together and build that trust between members of the group. Secondarily, it's important for us to think about openness changing our minds. Oftentimes, we come into groups thinking that we're going to be the ones who are going to change other people's minds, my way or the highway, right? But we have to be willing to understand that we might be wrong. And perhaps we can be persuaded by another person in the group and their people. Believing in the success of other people, right? Believing that we work on something together and this person is going to accomplish their part of the class presentation unless we assume otherwise. Being accountable, right? Recognizing, hey, if I mess up and I don't do my share or part of the group, the solution is not to ignore it, not respond, not communicate, and pretend that it didn't exist, right? But instead to say, hey, I really dropped the ball, I really got far behind a book, and I can't complete this part of the project. We really have to have somebody else do it, right? And taking responsibility, recognizing what part of the group activities and tasks you find yourself tasked with doing, and recognizing if you didn't achieve those, what your role in that group might look like. So building trust takes time, but being direct and honest helps us a lot in groups. Another factor for us to consider here is the idea of context, right? So we'll be talking more about this next week when we look at different cultures and ways of measuring difference across cultures. But inevitably, when we're in groups, we're going to be communicating with people who come from different cultural backgrounds, lived experiences, and perspectives than we do. So it's important for us to think about context as one such factor. Context runs a spectrum from low to high, right? Low context cultures are those like the United States. Oftentimes, communication is more direct, right? Verbal communication, the spoken or written word, is generally a better reflection of what the speaker is actually trying to say. So, for example, if somebody says no in a culture like the United States or Australia, right, we assume no. High context cultures place a greater emphasis on nonverbal communication, things like facial expressions, tone of voice, your use of volume, style. Those are things that play a much bigger role in shaping the ways that people communicate. Good example of this is in Japan, right? It's generally more common rather than somebody directly saying no, to say yes, but look off to the side, or say maybe, or to say it in a very hesitant tone of voice, right? It's not a one-to-one between saying no versus saying maybe, but an important element of understanding group communication is understanding that different members are going to communicate differently and parsing out the meaning that different contexts of cultures might bring. Another idea is that of code switching. This is particularly for folks who might be bi or multilingual. It's the idea that maybe you're speaking one language in your own home. Maybe you're speaking another language when you go to school, right? And one thing that commonly happens is the ways that people might mix and sprinkle elements of one language into a conversation. Maybe there's a word in a different language that represents something that another language can't quite capture, right? I like to give the example. My partner's parents spent an extended period of time in Hong Kong many, many years ago, and they learned Mandarin. And so my partner tells the story of how their parents would always, if they wanted to say something that the kids weren't supposed to hear, would say it in Mandarin, right? It's an example of code switching, changing languages, moving between languages is a way of communicating things that might be for a specific audience or for a specific effect. So self-disclosure, right, is a process by which we come to develop trust and understanding with other people. And it's a tightrope because on one end, we don't want to overshare and in our first meeting share a horrible breakup that we went through and tell our whole life story. But we also don't want to remain entirely closed off for our whole experience with that person. Okay, so how we choose to share and provide more information about ourselves to other people helps us to build trust and helps them to understand us a little bit better. One example I always like is back when I coached speech and debate, we get to know new teammates and students. You might find this relatable if you are ever involved in a club or activity that does travel for competition. The moment when it really feels like self-disclosure and getting to know people has really hit is whenever we travel for our first competition. Because, it's with brand, it's hours to drive somewhere. So we've got like the long car or van rides, got a lot of time for people to sit down and converse with each other. People have the chance to share their favorite music, right? There's a lot more camaraderie and casual conversation that naturally develops the more time that you spend with other people. Right? So self-disclosure is an important way by which we develop that comfort and trust in other people. Another big factor for us to consider is digital groups, right? So over the last several years, we've seen a lot of groups that have emerged either exclusively digitally, things such as Facebook groups. Perhaps you're in a Discord server that is into a particular game or activity, right? Or you might find yourself part of a text thread or using things like Slack, Discord, or Google Meet as a way of communicating in your group outside of face-to-face meetings, right? So when it comes to digital group communication, we'll get more into the specifics later. There are some important things to know, right? The norms matter and engaging with the norms in the group matter. Particularly, perhaps your group has a policy that you don't post GIFs or don't post memes when you're in this digital group, right? Thinking about what's acceptable for participating in that group is really important. Gender, right, is a really big factor for us to consider with communication more generally, but group communication in particular, given that in group settings, right, power dynamics might play out, or gendered language or sexist language might be used. Thinking about empathy, right, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and recognizing that when we communicate online, right, oftentimes we are losing a lot of the subtext and subtlety that we have face-to-face. We don't get the same role of facial expressions, tone of voice, volume, and so on that we might get in an actual conversation with somebody. Thinking about humor, right? Particularly humor that might be misunderstood. Sometimes people like to use slash and S to indicate sarcasm when they're communicating online, right? Or perhaps you're using emojis, right? And your use of emojis brings about differences, like generational differences in what's being used, right? Perhaps you're in a text thread with somebody and you have an older member of the group and you like post an eggplant emoji and they're like, oh, it's a vegetable, right? So being careful about what's appropriate when you're communicating digitally is important. And also thinking about flaming, right? Intentionally hurting or cyberbullying somebody, catfishing, pretending to be somebody that you're not online are important factors too. The last thing I want to hit on here is this idea of media richness, right? When we're communicating among group members online, one thing to think about is how much sensory engagement there is with media. So media richness theory gives us a spectrum. On the one end, we have very detached things like emails. On the other, we have a video call or face-to-face. How rich media is, how much it engages with our senses. Their video, is their audio, how much are we able to parse out? Because again, a lot of our communication is happening non-verbally. So our ability to understand and build trust with people in a group is predicated on our ability to create that engagement with them. So media richness helps us to understand some of those differences in the channels that we might have that impact for communication. So with that being said, what I want to do now is shift gears and have us work on the survival activity. So I'm just going to do a quick head count. We've got 4, 8, 15. Okay, perfect. So we'll do 3 groups of 5. And I have the prompt, and I'll ask that only one person per group needs to fill this out. So I'll pass these 3 out. So we'll have a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We'll have a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, and in the back 5. Then we'll have a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So hand these out, one per group. So you and your companions have just survived the crash of a small plane. Both the pilot and co-pilot were killed in the crash. It's mid-January and you're in northern Canada. Daily temperature is 25 degrees below zero and the night temperature is 40 degrees below zero. There's snow on the ground and the countryside is wooded with several creeks crisscrossing the area. The nearest town is 20 miles away. They're all dressed up in city clothes appropriate for a business meeting. And your group of survivors managed to salvage a list of items. Note at the end, there should be another break. The compass and the chocolate bars are 2 separate things. So you've got these 12 things here. What your group needs to do in the next 20 minutes is rank these 12 items from most important to least important and come to an agreement as a group about these. Avoid looking up or cheating online. You should just be working together as a group. And this is the only information you have. So any other details about the scenario or things your group is going to have to take a best guess at or figure out for yourself. Once you've done that, I will ask each group to explain how they decided on the list that they did. Consider the roles that members of the group played and figure out some of the similarities and differences the groups had in their values and goals. So take some time to break into your groups, to look through this list and come to a decision on your ranking of these survival items.
So the items are small wall, small hat, weighing 45,000 total. Scanner short name, newspaper, number person, cigarette lighter, the household. Stamps to survivor, 20 by 20 foot. Canvas. Burnout. 1 quart of 100 feet whiskey. Compass and my family side.
Yeah. I was just, okay, oh, an aerial map. Oh, yeah, so that's one of them, don't know where, go to the city.
Well, I think the main thing is provides temperature.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it says in the prompt that it's 25 below.
No, where it is.
Well, really below.
No matter what, you don't need
Oh,
to.
yeah. Yeah, like, you don't wanna die.
Yeah, because we have like.
Very high. I'd say that's the next.
Definitely, yeah, we definitely.
Yeah.
Pretty high, it's pretty high.
Like it was supposed to. They're wider.
Go lighter fluid into lighter.
Yeah, so have fluid. So
That with the steel wall. So these,
How are you gonna?
these are a pair.
No, so have it right now, so.
big smart house, you know, forest, you know. So like these are three. Yeah, I'd say number one layer up. And I'd say. Layer up. What? Okay, after the close, I'd probably say the map is gonna be the second one important because they have 40 below, we're not. We at that fire. Down that back. So the heavy mapping. So mapping how this are. Yeah. Let's do property. Chocolate crystal. Okay, so I probably go. Still, I think. Oh, fire. Yeah, that's what I. It's negative 25. It gets.
What's the thought of like, if you are, then you want to find you. And then
Yeah,
you're-
yeah.
As long
Yeah,
as you
that's-
stay alive.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about
And traditional, survival, norms of staying in the same spot, right?
and it says it's in northern Canada, so it's a lot of places.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I guess we want to. So Axe is second. Because Axe gets the wood, because then you can, with an axe, you can be like, slow, to start a fire, you get the cigarette lighter, doesn't wood.
Right.
So I don't know if homes are necessarily adding more, I probably put like.
The essentials.
Yeah, I mean, I think the essentials. I mean, but it's like.
We don't have a lot of stuff.
This is pretty hard. To do a lot of work.
No.
Right.
So Axe gives the word.
Yeah,
so this is the spark. And then you go, right? So you just be straight.
Just think of like, yeah, the add-ons. you can put it in.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need. Right. You can do that.
Well, the new place, I think is important because
Snow.
it's.
Yeah. And then.
But like, what's on the-
Canvas, yeah, canvas
This is that waterproof and very, so like, you know.
yeah, and you can make a. No, this, we'll just be pretty now, yeah. These are just straight notes.
Yeah, 'cause they were only-
I feel like this. The whiskey or the newspaper. No, I mean, it might be right. In my, I'm like,
Oh, yeah, no, it's not bad. Sorry.
yeah, so I probably put, yeah, it'll make us feel better when we die. I think that's the value of dying now. We're like 50-50 on higher levels. I think still work pretty well.
Yeah.
We can get through without it. That's to make it easy. Oh, there's a gun here too.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah. So I probably rate that.
Straight in the-
It's fully.
Sorry. Well, I know that it's better than literally nothing. I mean, it's not the trouble. A 45. Yeah. I don't know, but either way, like some amount of shots to,
I'm not gonna say that.
yeah. So. If I was fifth or sixth, right?
Yeah.
45 meters.
Yeah, so we'll take that. Okay, I'd say we probably. So.
Yeah. Short is probably more. Short line. Oh, it's just straight back. It's not good. It will be frozen, so I mean, 3 days of the not eating for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
And then,
Well, yeah.
I guess we probably put the chocolate bars right under that.
Oh, I'm just saying. So is all the food before? Because there's like Matt's still pretty high up there.
Yeah.
I'd say now, it really depends on the scenario, like, if we have to make it to the town, then the map important, but if we're just trying to write it out in, you know, red.
Why are these guys dying? It matters. That's just sad news.
We have about 10 more minutes.
Easier to wait in place and just survive.
That'd be my feeling.
Because I've been
We can
20
keep it
miles
high.
with business clothing, you're not gonna. do that.
No, not in the snow, it's when
And hiking that much is what the play
Well,
will.
yeah.
right, but assuming that part of the plan is.
In 20 miles, and I think several creeks, there's crossing to follow it.
Oh,
So I think you're
You
screwed.
could,
So
well,
I
that
put a
is.
map,
maybe off the map.
yeah, I'd say we're basically just gonna.
Well, but I think this wrecks you, like, I think like.
Oh, yeah.
Right, and the thing is, you have to. Yeah, with you, and
You can eat it.
that's,
Well, we should probably.
I'd say we could try it out. Like, I don't want to have to. Really, yeah, so.
I don't know if other things you might also do.
Yeah, it would be.
Oh, yeah, because you.
Okay, okay,
Probably like 7.
let's try to get our stack with. So, number one, let's go with extra layer.
Someone else write my hand.
Okay, extra layers.
Yeah, it's close, because that's right away.
So big, like, axe.
No, I would like, I feel canvas. Okay, I can see canvas,
Yeah, I'll cover you up.
and maybe I put that act
Then act,
for the wood.
and then it's whether we want to prioritize something like doing this with.
It's sort of, I'd say act and then some of the like fire using the wood though, because those are heat, you're gonna burn a lot.
Yeah.
So you're gonna burn a lot.
I know, but like, so a kind of Crisco would solve that, right?
I don't know if Chris knows all that stuff.
No, I'm saying. reverse power, yeah.
Yeah, but we don't want, but we don't know how long it's gonna take. We want
Yeah, you have
to
to
conserve.
compare it.
Yeah. So I go lighter. Yeah.
You're not gonna go.
And then probably the Crisco, because we are gonna need the right? Or like, what do you guys?
Yeah, I think Crisco by part of this now. And I think because these are pretty dead.
Okay, probably.
This is pretty dead too.
Yeah.
Oh, the gun.
The gun. I think that was.
Yeah. Yeah, gun. So we got that one, we got that one, we got that one. Got that one.
And like, I can watch.
Brad, canvas is done, those are done.
Yeah.
So you're.
Yeah.
11, 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, still probably.
I'd say something more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does still, that's a different food. Is steel wool might be probably like 10, 11.
Well, if we're not leaving, then
But if we don't get saved, I'll reject it.
If we don't get it, we're not gonna survive.
Right, like we
You
can't.
guys were so over there. You're like, fuck. You're like, yeah, well.
I hike 20 miles in a day in good temperatures.
Yeah, it's tough on it, like at 20 below.
Yeah, but
Like,
it's still all over the.
even with, I have two shirts, we're
Yeah.
like, it's not gonna happen.
So.
I mean, if I killed rescue, and took all your clothes, maybe I'd make it on my own.
Have about 5 more minutes. You finish up here.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably chocolate crackers and stuff.
Yeah, calories, you know, like the, whiskey, I put under that because it can be used for like the fire or, you know.
Charlie's paper.
And then.
And then we can.
I was just thinking about how like. I was doing
Oh, yeah. I think the air.
but like, can you say it like actual apple?
Oh, you're getting it. Oh, and we should get the plane crash, right? So.
Yeah.
Oh.
Let's not think about it. Let's say.
We want to win.
But like,
Well, we want to win, but that's no, it was a super good point.
But I.
Candidates or your. Candidates or, yeah. Because they're not, we're just a tourniquet. That's it.
that was good.
I like it.
There's the only two things I would do.
Yeah, I think we'll get out. I like chocolate and whiskey.
I get it.
But it's lighter than so.
Or lighter and
what
whiskey.
Then you have. Yeah.
I probably still. use the-
I think, I don't know, I think pistol ball lighter is a good point.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's just a convenience thing.
Well, my thought was because.
Well, it's 20 below ground.
Because you have fire, thing,
But it's a hunting machine.
yeah, and.
Like.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, pistol and lighter switching.
Yeah, I'm gonna say.
You can swap it for the.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot.
Okay, yeah. So pick the three, yeah, okay. All right.
All right, so let's actually.
How do we group decide this? Someone right now.
Survival.
Yeah, survival. And,
And, okay, well,
In place, discuss merits.
Roles.
Roles, you discuss merits and then, vote.
You guys kind of talk about that. Yeah, I guess some people brought up like there was.
Roles data, improvement plan.
I didn't really ask that.
But we fell into them, so you're a reporter. Coordinator.
Yeah.
Let's get over link.
Okay, oh yeah, Ben, by the way. Gabe?
Gabe, yeah.
Gabe?
Okay,
Gabe? No. Calvin.
okay.
So go ahead and finish up your work and have somebody ready to share for your group.
So.
Yeah, but coordinator.
And Gabe was.
I'd say the rest of the people, you know, like idea.
Yeah, team workers is good. Similar to the difference in your group value goals.
Okay, here.
Uh,
So let's hear from groups and talk about this together. So let's start with this group here on this side. What was the rank list you came up with?
Okay, so The top of the list was a sectional air mount made of plastic.
Okay.
And then we had a small axe, and then a compass, and then a cigarette lighter, and then a ball of steel wool, a can of Crisco shortening, extra shirt and pants, 1 quart of 100 proof whiskey, and then a loaded 45 caliber, and then newspapers, then the chocolate bars, and then the canvas.
Okay. And why did you all decide on that ranking?
So we decided, ranking because we're gonna walk the 20 miles instead of sitting out and waiting for someone to save us. And we decided it will only take us like 1 to 2 days, so. And then the weather also helped us just determine like what we chose.
Okay.
And then the group member, like the roles.
Yeah.
Most of us were team workers or plants, and then we had like monitor, evaluator. And then we had similarities and differences. Some similarities would be, we agreed on walking would be the best choice.
Okay.
And the priorities, we had kind of the same views on like the food and clothing, etc. And the differences is survival over comfort instinct. So we just kind of would differ on if we were surviving or like the hunts.
Sure. Okay. So it seems like your group was able to fairly early on figure out the goal, you know, to just get out of there, and really was able to develop strategies such as in a plan or 2 mover role to figure out how you're going to get there, right? Once you've got that clear strategy laid out. Awesome. How about here in the middle? What was your list?
Okay, we categorize ours from most important to least to be 20 by 20 piece of heavy duty canvas,
Okay.
a cigarette lighter, a ball of steel wool, small axe, newspapers, extra shirt and pants for each survivor, 1 quart of 100 proof whiskey, a loaded 45 caliber pistol, chocolate bars, can of Crisco sharpening, a compass, and then a sectional air made of plastic.
Okay.
We decided on this list, so, excuse me. We reasoned out that we prioritized first on shelter, then heat, then the rest. Yeah. We were different in the approach. We weren't gonna try and walk distance and try and find help. We were to hope our best chances with the search party to come get us.
Okay.
So the roles that we played as a group, we all acted as contributors rather than someone taking like main priority, but we all like bounce off each other, see each other's ideas, what we agree on and disagree on. Just the next question. And we all seem to prioritize heat and shelter. And that's how we.
Okay. So kind of a different set of goals here. Let's get shelter, right? And do what we can to survive and hunker down, and kind of developing a list and a set of strategies with that in mind. Interesting. And then how about here on the side? What was your list?
We also figured we'd stay put rather than trying to walk 20 miles.
Okay.
So we went clothes, canvas, axe, lighter, Crisco, pistol, whiskey, chocolate, newspaper, steel wool, compass map.
Okay.
We decided we had one coordinator that was talking us through it, and we were all giving our ideas and opinions. We only have really a couple and 1 or 2 differences, and we voted on the differences. To out some goals.
Okay.
So yeah, we have 1 coordinator, we had a recorder, we had 1 monitor and evaluator. And then we had 2 team workers that just contributed our ideas and our opinions. Similarity. We figured that things would be better. And the differences, again, we had our differences, we both what we felt we best.
Okay. So it's interesting hearing from your group. You kind of developed a democratic process, 5 people, majority rules voting on some of the areas where you disagree. Definitely a way in a small group that you can hash out and deal with those challenges. So really interesting to see the variation in some of the goals and strategy and team roles that you all have, right? And this is in no way an impact on your grade or anything. This is just for fun. I always like to share the official ranking. So this scenario came up from Mark Wanvig, who is a former instructor in survival training, the Reconnaissance School of the 101st Division of the U.S. Army, who does wilderness survival training in Minnesota. And this is a training that's used in military training classrooms. So the list that comes from him, number 1 was the cigarette lighter, with the rationale that it can be used as a source of warmth for making a fire because it makes sparks even without the fluid. Number 2, and I think this is funny every single time, is the steel wool. And the steel wool is actually able to catch sparks for a flame with the cigarette lighter. Number 3 was the shirt and pants. Provides warmth, can also be used for shelter, bedding, bandages, string when it's unraveled, and fuel for the fire. Number 4 is the Crisco shortening. It can be used as a mirror signaling device from the lid. It can be used on exposed skin for protection from the cold. If it's melted into an oil, it can be used as fuel. And also it can be used and melted to melt snow, which helps to make drinking water at a better temperature. Number 5 is the canvas, which helps to make shelter and could even be used to signal people from above. 6 is the small axe for a fire. 7 is the chocolate bars for some food, energy. 8 is the newspaper that helps us to start a fire. Could also be used as insulation for your arms and legs. And verbal signaling, like make it a microphone. 9 is the pistol. The main reason here is that it could help to provide sound signaling for somebody in danger. But there is concern about anger and frustration in the group, causing that to be used in a bad way. If you've ever seen a zombie survival show, you know how that plays out. 10 is the whiskey. Whiskey can be used for building fire and doesn't really have a whole lot of use outside of that unless, you give up. 11 is the canvas or the compass. The compass helps you to walk to the nearest town, but not really, because you don't know where that town is located, right? So you don't know which direction to go. But it can be used as a reflector. And 12 is the air map, because it might encourage people to walk to the nearest town, but it could be used as some ground cover. So I thought it was kind of fun to hear the official list. Some of the thinking is that the 20 miles is a very long time to arrive. There's also a lot of immediate shock that comes as you've survived the crash and people are trying to figure out what to do. Holding a fire and retaining heat is seen as really important. There's a greater emphasis here on trying to signal somebody for help. So kind of fun, but the main reason that I had us do this activity, right, was to think about small group communication that played out here. First of all, one thing that I noticed is the way that you all figured out a strategy and an overall goal, right? This scenario is intentionally ambiguous. You don't know which direction the town is. You don't know, if your strategy is to hunker down or to get out of there, right? Your group had to figure that out yourselves. So figuring out and developing a goal for the group that's going to guide all the actions it does, that's something we see in a lot of small group scenarios. Figuring out the roles and responsibilities of group members, whether you're voting, whether you're taking on more team worker roles, if you're monitoring and evaluating the things the group does, those are all things that you all tried to figure out together. And also some of the ways you dealt with differences. Again, whether it was voting, whether it was trying to find a compromise, you all were able to develop a strategy for dealing with those disagreements and differences that might come up. So I think this is a fun way to see how small group dynamics play out, especially when you're trying to figure out how to reach a goal and develop a strategy and set of behaviors that your group members need to do. So to wrap up for today, this helps us to understand small group decisions and behavior in working through this activity. We talked about trust and status, as well as digital group communication in these small group settings. So we're going to shift gears next Monday and talk about intercultural and international small group communication. please make sure that your group member names are on that sheet of paper and pass that sheet of paper forward. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the melting snow. That's thankfully not -20 degrees. And I will see you all next week.